It was just the postman dropping off more work. Not getting many cameras in from the States at the moment, although this one came from the States, because the United States Postal Service suspended normal airmail services to half the planet around the end of September, and lucky New Zealand was one of the places they suspended services to. So stuff can only get here with the United States Postal Service if the people are using priority mail, express priority mail, yeah. And that, if you haven't discovered it yet, costs about 2.5 times what normal mail costs. So I'm just removing stray springs and things from the base of the camera. That's the loose bits done. The coil spring came from here, that operates the capping plate. I need to remove the front of the camera. So first I need to remove the shutter release button. There's a screw under that Leatherette patch, so I need to deal with that. And the leatherettes either side of the front of the camera need to come off. And they are as enthusiastic as the ones on the base of the camera were. So just see applying a bit of naphtha to my scalpel will allow me to slide under that leatherette easier. It's working. The problem with old leatherettes is that they lose their flexibility, they become brittle, and that means that they just break far too easily. When you end up with a situation like this where the leatherette is glued down pretty firmly, the leatherette can actually just snap off at the point you're trying to lever it up from. Normally the action of the scalpel is not so much cutting as acting as a broad lever to lever the leatherettes away from the glue, breaking the glue bond. As I'm peeling this away, I'm very aware of the pattern of the leatherette, watching the way the leatherette distorts as I apply pressure. Often the hardest part to get loose is where the leatherette bends to go round the corner. Okay, that's off. That's off in one piece. No cracks. It's mate on the other side. Now the camera body, of course, the casting is some alloy of aluminium, and that will differ in its makeup from the pressed aluminium camera back, and not uncommonly you get a difference in behaviour of the adhesive where it's applied over different metals. Probably not when they're new, not when the adhesive's first put on, but at some later date, presumably as the composition of the different metals react with the glue or promote or inhibit the breakdown of the glue. So it's not uncommon to find that the leatherettes will peel off easily in one place, but are not even vaguely interested in peeling off in a different place. You certainly notice that on the front of the cameras, where this plate, the adhesive, the leatherettes are often glued quite differently here to here, even though it all went on at the same time with the same adhesive and the same leatherette. I'm just working around that corner now. There it is. So that's my other leatherette from the front of the camera off in one piece and in a good order. So the front of the camera can be opened up now, and the front's held on with 4 screws. Underneath these screws there'll be 12 washers in this case. They are dished spring washers, and they're used to provide strong force pushing upwards, which the screws act against to pull the plate back downwards, so that you can adjust the distance between the lens mount and the film plane. Well, had it been a 3 or a Reflex S, I would have removed all these rings first, but it's a 4, so I don't need to. I'm going to get my flash contact here loose. That wire hooks up through that gap in the body. And there is my shutter released from the camera. That looks very clean. There's no particular sign that anyone's ever serviced that. Here's the front cam from the transfer shaft. I'll remove that shaft. This is a little bit sticky with dried grease. Our 12 washers. As I say, they're dished, and where they're laid out, dome side down, dome side up, like that, dome side down, to provide the maximum height and therefore the maximum compression. Just making sure I've got 12. Yes, it looks good. That's the camera body. Right, to carry on, I'm can remove the meter dial, the setting wheel here at the top. There's a small brass screw here which stops that cord from being able to fall off the pulleys at that point. To remove that first, just take the lower pulley off. Let's unhook that spring so that's not trapped. I can pull those meter cords through, or I should be able to. Yes. Here's my meter dial at the top, the setting wheel. Put that to one side. That's got the cord on it. I could leave it there possibly, or it may be that the cord comes adrift and I've got to put it back in again from scratch, but that's no hardship. That's our shutter cocking rack. It's not unlike the ones used in the Retina 3Cs. It's just different proportions. With the 3Cs, this piece would be deeper and it would have a flag on the top that moves the frame counter. In these cameras, the frame counter's at the base of the camera. There's a funny smear here in that lacquer. Looks to me like someone's had the film advance apart in the past. Take that screw out. And we know the film advance doesn't move as smoothly as it should do. It works, but it just feels rough. This plate off. This is tight mostly because that lacquer is squeezed down around the edges of it. Okay, have that plate off. Now here, there's a little drive dog and a tiny spring. I'll just revolve that around so that the spring's not under the same tension. It's a tiny little leaf spring folded over on itself. And it's very easily lost. Take pains not to lose that. Here's that little drive dog. I'm using quite light pressure to remove those parts, but you need to come in from both sides with your screwdriver in order to get it to lift off. It's got to lift off nice and square. Now this screw has a spring on the top. There's a little ratchet pull for the film advance. I'll take that spring off because it'll get lost in the cleaning otherwise. There's a little standoff that goes under that. There's a single screw here on the other side. I'm going to have to check the film advance components quite carefully because there was some, because of that unusual stiffness, it doesn't bode well. I'm just going to swing the mirror and capping plate down out of the way so that they're not hitting the table when I've got the camera down on its front there. I need to remove the rewind button next. That's very tight. Okay, that's going to be a fight. You can tell it's going to be a fight as soon as it hurts your fingers when you're trying to hold that sprocket down and turn the knob. So I'm going to have to put something on there to stop that from turning while I use my pliers on the button. I'll better do that. I think I can just put my scalpel handle down the side there. Yeah, that was enough. It's loose now. So the button and the washer can go through the cleaner. The other piece will not, the spring. This is the screw that connects the sprocket to the sprocket shaft. There's our sprocket shaft. Here is the sprocket. It's driven by that screw head coming through that slot there. This is the guide bush on the top of the film advance. This is the clutch. Now the clutch, his job is to provide some controlled slippage, and that's working exactly as I'd expect it to. There are 3 screws. This is all very sticky. I'll just remove this spring here. This is the lever that locks the rewind button in position. I'll just undo its screw. And there's the lever. There are 3 screws hold the guide bush, the lower guide bush for the film advance shaft to the casting. And I'm just having trouble finding them. Oh, it's because I'm looking in the wrong place. The screw's quite tight. It's not uncommon to find these screws loose. They're certainly not loose here. That doesn't want to lift out. I thought I had the screws. Yeah, I have got the screws all undone, but it doesn't want to lift out. Okay. Let's just check what's going on there. Yeah, all the screws are undone. That's simply gummed in with dried out grease. All this sticky grease has just glued everything in there. So I'll recover those 3 screws. Now that grease would be enough to cause the stiffness that I felt with the film advance. There's no question about it, that's just terrible. Okay, so there's that. We can let the take-up spool out. That's plastic, that'll just be cleaned by hand. And in the camera body, just the usual dirt and filth. There's a big nest of film chips under here. Yeah, film chips. They're the pieces of film between the sprocket holes on the film. They get torn out, particularly when people don't set their frame counter correctly, so at the end of the film it doesn't lock. That's the most common thing, or people get to the end of the film, don't realise that the end of the film, realise that the film advance lever is a little bit stiff, and just push it harder. And unfortunately, that's forcing stuff on cameras very rarely is a good thing to do. They don't respond well to that and tend to sulk and never work again. Well, so far so good. Now I'm going to remove that mirror from there before I do any more work on the camera so that I can keep it clean. It's got a couple of specks of dust on it, but nothing dramatic. The main thing I want to avoid is getting any fingerprints on it, because when you're handling the camera while you're working on it, you're fighting with one part or another, it's incredibly easy to accidentally slip and wipe a finger across that mirror. And surface silvered mirrors, well, they're fairly you just about can't clean them with anything. There are certain things you can get away with doing, but best not to have to. I want to see if I can remove the mirror from this Reflex 4. It looks to me like that's glued in. It's not going to move. Sometimes they have a little spot of adhesive on the back of them to stop them moving on the tray. And I'd say from the looks of that, that's what the story is here. I would have liked to have lifted that off, just to make sure, just to give me a bit of insurance really, against sticking my big greasy fingers on there while I'm servicing the camera. But I'll have to just work more carefully and work around that. I want to get all this rubbish off the sides here. I'm going to take the door off the back just because I don't want to damage the leatherette on the back of the camera while I'm splashing solvent around on the front of the camera. So I'll just remove these 3 screws. It's not absolutely essential to get rid of the remains of the old adhesive, but it makes for an easier job putting things back together. I'm going to tuck a tissue down in here to protect that mirror. I'll go and get one. That'll just help protect that against any splashes. And I've got some CRC heavy duty Lectra clean. And that should soften and melt that remains of adhesive and leatherette that's on the front here. I'm just scraping this with the back edge of my scalpel. Removing this stuff while it's soft. So what we're seeing here is the adhesive and some portion of the leatherette. Right, and I'll just do that with a cotton bud soaked in the same solvent. I should be able to remove the rest of that. Some of it's going to need a little bit more scraping, I can see, but generally that's lifting off quite nicely. And there's no damage to the metal of the camera body at all. I was saying earlier that the adhesive often sticks differently to different metals, and you can see there's still remnants on that aluminium casting, but the chromed brass trim here, the same adhesive and leatherette put on at the same time, has cleaned off there without a trace. Well, that's looking pretty good. Just knocking down any high spots there. Some of that is still on there. That's good, that side's done nicely. And I'll do exactly the same with this side. With both sides there nicely cleaned now and ready to go, I can clean up the rest of the body. Mostly I'm interested in here in removing old dried grease, dust and dirt. There's little to clean on the base of the camera because there's a chrome trim plate covers this whole base plate. Be careful of the spring there, you don't want to damage that. This grease is quite hard and dry in here. Might take a couple of applications of the naphtha to shift that. And if it doesn't want to go, I'll use the other stuff. That's CRC Lectra clean. But the naphtha is good to work with. It's comparatively benign as these things go. The Reflex 4 differs from its earlier siblings in that when you open the back, the frame counter automatically returns to the start position. It's got a sprung-loaded wheel in there which will return to the start. If you have cause to take that mechanism apart, because perhaps if it's not working smoothly or something, it can be a lot of fun getting it back together again and working. I'll inspect that closely when I get to it and decide whether I need to take it apart or not. That's good. So that's the top and the bottom of the camera. I need to deal with the inside at the back there. Now this is the bottom of the take-up spool, sits in here. And normally there's a little bit of grease there anyway. But often there's a lot of dust and dirt and film chips, particularly film chips, from when people have not stopped at the end of the film and just kept winding and until stuff broke. Right, well with the dry paintbrush I'll flick this dust loose. Quite common to have sand and dust in cameras. Sand being very common because so many people like going to the beach in summer. And of course you can't go to the beach without taking a camera. That's looking good. Now I'll have a look in the front here. This is all very clean. As these things go, that's very good. So I'll just put that back over my mirror. Oh, in fact, I'll flip my mirror up out of the way while I wipe this stuff down here. That's where the wheel for the exposure meter coupling cord runs. So I'll clean that old grease away. and all the dust and dirt that it's picked up. There's very little there, that's quite clean. I'll just set the mirror back down there again. And I need to clean up in the top here. This is quite clean. It hasn't been excessively greased. The more grease you get in a place like that, the worse it becomes as the grease gathers up all the dust in the world, and the grease dies of old age and goes hard. Okay, that's looking very good. Pretty pleased with the state of that. Let me have a look at this frame counter. I'm just going to advance that count. A couple of notches, and when I open the camera back, it springs back to the start straight away. So that's good. That means that's working quite well. I'll check that again once I've got my film advance mechanism in there complete, and make sure that it works well with the film advance mechanism. Okay, well I'll pop that body aside for a second. I need to look at the parts here. These are the parts I've taken out of the body, and they're just back from the cleaner. So they're all free from grease and dust and dirt, and I'm just looking at them to make sure that there are no obvious problems with anything here. I wouldn't be expecting any missing teeth, because the camera did sort of work after a fashion. And if they sort of work, that means that very likely the camera is all there, all complete, and it's just a bit, things are sticking because they need to be cleaned. This is all looking very promising. Right, well I think I can start reassembling the body on the strength of that.